Okay, Madam, Namaskar.
Namaskar.
I welcome you to this faculty development, 7 days faculty development program on research methodology. And I also welcome to all the participants to the second half of this third day program. I welcome Dr. Sajad to brief about ma'am. Dr. Sajad.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Welcome to the second session of third day of the Faculty Development Center. And today we are having Dr. M.D. Usha Devi, who is the Professor of Education, and she has retired from the Institute for Social and Economic Change, Bangalore. She was the head of the Center for Human Resource Development. And she has a PhD degree in education from University of Mysore, and 2 more degrees of postgraduate diplomas in higher education and distance education from Indira Gandhi National Open University. Post her retirement, she was awarded the Senior Research Fellow from ICSSR from 2013 to 2015, and currently she's working as a freelancer, researcher and consultant. She has recently completed research consultancy work in the area of student loan in higher education, which is really a very burning issues quite a long time. She has over 2 decades of teaching and more than 30 years of research experiences. She has completed over 60 research projects in education and allied field. She has guided almost 6 students for the award of the PhD degree and has several academic distinctions and honors to her credit. She is the recipient of Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute Research Fellow twice, one in 1994 and second in 2001, and US Food Foundation Visiting Fellow 1994 and Indo-Dutch Program for Alternative Development in 2007 from Netherlands. She has specialized areas of education policy and management, teacher education, higher education, distance education, gender studies, and research methodology. She is on the expert committee of Indian Council for Social Science Research and on the National Resource Panel for the Ministry of Human Resource Development, now the Ministry of Education. She has served as a nodal officer for plan appraisal and monitoring national flagship programs of school education in Karnataka, as well as in other states. Currently, she is on the Academic Advisory Panel and Doctoral Committee of Research Programs in Education and Cross-Disciplinary Studies at Institute for Social and Economic Change, Center and State Universities. She has published 3 books and over 40 independent research articles in edited volumes, referee journals, and more than 25 research monographs and working papers. So today she is going to deliberate upon doing social science research during the pandemic, this lockdown period and pandemic era. We welcome you on behalf of the Faculty Development Center, Mizoram University, and on behalf of the participants. We welcome you, madam. Over to you now.
Thank you, Dr. Sajad Ahmad, for your kind introduction. Thank you, Professor Loknath Mishra, for giving me the opportunity. Good afternoon to everybody. So today's session will be on the role of social science. This is how I have titled, during the global pandemic crisis. How do we engage in the social science research? This would be the topic of discussion, today's discussion. I think before we get into the core issues of this, we need to understand the context and background. See, what is this global pandemic crisis situation that we are currently in? As we understand, pandemic, it's a disease outbreak and it spreads across different countries and continents. And so it has a spatial spread and it affects more people and takes more lives than an epidemic. And then the WHO has declared COVID-19 to be a pandemic with the illness becoming severe and spreading quickly over a wide area. So this is the current situation. It's a public health crisis we are in now. In fact, if we understand the situation, we begin to see that this pandemic began with human dimension. It affected human beings, and then the health crisis seriously impacting the lives of people, economy, society, and also it affected the movement of people across different regions. And now, we know that, this is something, which came as a bolt from the blue. Nobody imagined that, this pandemic crisis situation would emerge in such a global context. And no country was, in fact, was prepared for this kind of a public health crisis. We noticed that as a result of this, many countries and the state governments, they responded to the situation very poorly. Because management of this public health crisis, it demands a huge manpower and resources, and no government or no country was prepared for this kind of an eventuality. And we know that most of the countries' public health system is not geared to this kind of a situation. They are a very weak public health system, and in fact most of the governments also lacked resources to manage this crisis, to combat the issues and challenges that emerged from this kind of a public health crisis. And we also noticed that this pandemic situation, the community response or the preparedness of the community was not very positive, because the response was aligned with cultural, geographical, and demographic factors. As we know that most of the countries, we have a diverse cultural groups and plurality, and the response to this public health crisis depended on the cultural background or the resources that different people had, depending on their social and cultural background. And so this is the kind of situation that we are in. Now, what is the significance of conducting social science research? Now that, most of the social science researchers are interested in engaging researchers, which have, some kind of an applied, research, which have solutions for different kinds of problems that emerge during different kinds of time, different periods of time. When this COVID-19 situation is there, in the pandemic crisis situation, social science research helps us for understanding the social, cultural, economic impacts of COVID-19. What are the social dimensions or the cultural or economic dimensions of this kind of a situation? COVID-19 has affected so many people, so many countries. See, depending on these kind of responses that each country is providing, so it depends again on the social and cultural economic impacts or the background. So social science helps us to understand, see, what is the nature of these kinds of dimensions that is impacting COVID-19. Now, the second point would be, for obtaining empirical evidence on the impacts of particular government policies. Why do we need to conduct social science research? Because we need to understand, or we need to gather empirical evidence to find out, what are the kinds of impacts even different specific government policies are having on this kind of a situation. How is this public health crisis being managed by specific government organizations in each of the countries? And another point would be to obtain or provide theoretical insights into which certain social change why certain social changes occurred. See, why, like this COVID-19, a public health crisis or this COVID-19 has impacted the society to such a large extent. There is totally a different kind of social change we are beginning to see. So do we get any kind of insights, theoretical insights, or can the prevailing sociological or cultural theories can explain this social change or questions which need to be engaged by researchers like us? And also for obtaining deeper insights about various issues, challenges in the implementation of specific programs or interventions. As this public health crisis started to emerge in different countries, each country had its own national mandates or national planning programs. Similarly, each national program, each of these states within the countries had its own, plans and programs or intervention to combat this kind of a situation, depending on the resources that are available. So, obviously, we notice that there is no uniform way of, combating this kind of a situation. So, each country or each state within the country started responding to these situations in the way it can, because depending on its resources availability or the way the government system, how it was functioning. So we do notice that there are a lot of variations or variety of problems and issues when, dealing with these kinds of programs or interventions for COVID-19. So conducting social science research would help us to understand these very dimensions, a variety of dimensions. Now, what question can social science research address? This would be the major, points, of discussion for researchers like us. How will the major questions would be, how will the COVID-19 restrictions, when we are talking about the COVID-19 restrictions, we are talking about the mandates or the lockdown, the home quarantine, wearing masks, physical distancing, washing hands with sanitizer. These are all the mandates, uniform standard mandates that every country is imposing. So these kinds of restrictions, so it obviously restricts freedom of people. So how is this COVID restrictions work with people? Do people, see this as a positive intervention, or do they think, it is negatively affecting their lives? So this would be the question that, we would be interested to address, when we are conducting social science research. So these questions, these kinds of questions will help us to understand how are people, working with these kinds of restrictions. Are these restrictions working properly? Or are these restrictions, are there any kind of, hindrances or barriers to impose these kinds of restrictions? Another questions will be, how long can these interventions work with people? See, like, we had initially, when we had this crisis, breaking out in our own country. So sometime, in March, we had the first lockdown, the nationwide lockdown. So, but then, initially when it started spreading, each state had its own, plan and programs to restrict or to impose lockdown, depending on the severity of the problems, severity of the spread of the COVID-19. So depending on this, then, people started responding to these mandates or restrictions. Initially, there was enthusiasm. You could see that, like everybody, was interested in this. But then, when it was realized that spread is not, it's not going to completely be over, will be removed within a short period of time, then people also started losing their patience and, patience. And then, they started responding in different ways, which was not expected or which was not positive for helping to remedy this kind of a situation. So we would be interested in understanding how long can these interventions work with people. So this is another question that we can engage in. Then we also have these frontline warriors, the medical staff, the paramedical staff, and then the police people, the security people. All these people's preparedness and dealing with crises vary from region to region. So this is another question, where, we would be interested to understand how are frontline warriors responding to this public health crisis? Are they adequately prepared? Are they dealing with this, effectively? Do they have enough resources? Are they, are there any other kinds of problems that they are not able to overcome? So this is another question that we would be interested in. Then issues of how social differences, social class or location will affect people's ability to respond to public health interventions. This would be another questions. Like the way people respond to these kinds of situations depend on their background, the social background. What is the kind of social background? Whether they belong to upper class or the lower class, or they belong to deprived caste categories or the elite sections. And then the location, where are they? Are they in the urban regions? Are they in the rural regions? Are they come from slums? Are they in the tribal areas? So depending on their location, geographical location, and their residential location, the response to this situation also may vary from place to place. And how are these interventions, when they're imposed with all good intentions, do people respond to this positively, so that it's possible to remove this the kind of problems or issues this COVID-19 is throwing up? This is another question that we would be interested in. Another question will be, what strategies are appropriate and effective to engage community in meaningful ways? This is perhaps the most important for social science researcher like us, because government it's whenever it has plans and it comes out with a new program or intervention, this is done at a large scale. But then when it has to be implemented at a grassroots level, there are different kinds of specific context specific situations, or at disaggregate level which may not work completely. So this would be, we would be interested in understanding how are different kinds of communities located across different regions are are taking this kind of intervention, responding to this intervention, and whether these interventions are working effectively for all people, for all areas, for all sections of people, for all sections of society. This would be another question that we would be interested in. Now, coming to the questions of like what questions continuing this the questions, we understand that coronavirus touches on virtually every part of life around the globe. It is something that it has not left anybody, like everybody is affected by this, and though you belong to the rich, the most affluent class, or you belong to the elite sections of society, or you are highly educated, or you're an illiterate living in rural areas, or you come from a very impoverished society. So it is affecting virtually every part of life and every person around the globe. See, we also notice that it's not only India which is facing this crisis. We notice that in fact if you're looking at the statistics reeled out by the World Health Organization, we notice that in the Europe and then the United States of America, they were the top ones, top countries we had high number of infected people, and also high number of casualties or deaths. So now we notice that it's not like you can't say that just because you live in an advanced country, or just because you're living in a rich country, this can be combated in very appropriately or very adequately. It's not like that. So it is affecting everybody, every country. Social scientists, as social scientists researchers, we are interested in using real-time data. So when the situation is breaking down, a situation breaks down in different parts of the world, so we are interested in collecting empirical evidences, field evidences, to examine how people are responding to the unfolding of pandemic in terms of economic, social, education, psychological behavior, actions, and outcomes. So our social science research would be essentially interested in finding out how are people, like how are they behaving, what kinds of actions, they are indicating, and what outcomes, because of these interventions, what outcomes, is evident. For this, we need empirical evidences, that is real-time data, real-time in the sense when this outbreak is, taking place in many countries. So we want to know how are these things, affecting people, and then we would be able to, we would be interested in collecting, gathering evidences, empirical evidences from the field. Now, this is in general, social scientists in general. Now for economists, those people who work in the area of economics, those who come from economic disciplines, for them, the specific questions that they would be interested in addressing is income and wages, income inequality. This would be one of the key questions that the economists would be interested to know. So income and wages, when there is a lockdown, when most of the production centers or most of the institutions, organizations are locked down, are closed, are shut down. So what do people do then? Particularly those wage earners, people who are in the lower lower hierarchy of the economic scale. So what do they, how do they now the wage earners, particularly the wage earners, the temporary wage earners, those people who work in unorganized sectors, for them, daily living, daily incomes. So how is it affecting them? Income and wage. What do they do then in such cases? This entire economic activity is shut down. See, where do they get income from? How are they engaging themselves? What are they doing for their livelihood? This would be the question for economists. Then also they would be interested in studying income inequality. That is, see, we noticed that when this lockdown happened, as it happened in many countries or across the globe, we noticed that those sectors, particularly those organized sectors, that is the so-called most trending or the most happening sector is the IT industry. So they had the corporate sectors, business corporate houses, the information technology IT sectors. Most of the software engineers or the software, those people who work in the IT sector, for them, this lockdown did not affect in the way it affected the unorganized sector. That is, for most of the organized business class, corporate houses, the lockdown, they had evolved their own alternate way of engaging people in work. And also their wages or the income was not affected to the extent that, you could see that happening in an unorganized sector. So they started allowing people to work from home. So for that, the resources were provided and people were asked to stay at home and then work. So this is something, where they could still find that, the productivity did not really, these kinds of situation did not affect the productivity of these kinds of sectors. And then for other, for those people, who are working in private sectors, particularly supposing, you are taking private schools, for instance. Private schools are closed down and most of the people who are employed in private schools as teachers, the schools managements, they're not paying them salary. So they say, now that, there is no face-to-face classroom situation, learning situation. So most of them, were laid off, or, they were asked to do minimum work, and for that, the salary also was not in commensurate with the what, they were doing in a real time kind of a in-person classroom interaction. So this kind of a school closure of schools or the private schools or the private companies or the unorganized sectors. So the income that was that was for due for these people were not was being paid. So with the result, what we notice is that those people who were engaged in IT sector and other corporate and organized sectors were able to obtain their income, retain their income levels. But then those people who were in the private companies or private sectors, for them the wages were not forthcoming. So with the result, the inequality was very wide, and then so it really affected people, poor people. So the poverty, that the differences between those in the upper layers of income and then those who are the lower hierarchical levels, the difference, the wage differences was very remarkable, and then you could see that it was really very huge. So this would be another question which economists would be interested in, and they would also be interested in labor supply and demand. So because of the closure of the most of the production centers, the demand also would gradually come down. So the labor supply, how are they managing? Most of the companies, they started, closing down, and then some of them were laid off, and then they started working, with very minimal staff. So this kind of a supply-demand gap, or this kind of, differences, that you would notice between supply and demand. See, economists would be interested in finding out, how is this supply is affected, and what is the demand, that is now, is being met. And then the employment and unemployment situation. In some cases, in most of the unorganized sectors or the private companies, there was total shutdown. As a result, most of these people, did not have any kind of work, so no income for them. So what is this employment? People, who were employed earlier, now they became unemployed. So how is this situation being met? This is another question economists would be interested in. Then livelihood and sustainability, economic well-being. How are they maintaining with all the situation, with so much of insecurity, economic insecurity? Then unpredictable kind of situation. How are they managing? How are they sustaining the livelihood? Or how are they managing this? How are they sustaining the livelihood? And how is the economic well-being being ensured? So these are also the, how are the governments, are responding to this situation? What is the government doing for this? Are they really, do they have adequate resources to provide for these kinds of, emergency situations? This would be another question economists would be interested in. Then coming to political scientists would be interested in questions relating to what policies and programs are in place, how are they working. So every country, derives its own policies, it has, it comes out with its own policies appropriate to the situation, and also programs and interventions to combat this kind of a situation, public health crisis. So are being, put in place. How are they working? What kinds of policies? Are they appropriate? See, the national, as a country, the country can have a national policy. Just 1 second, my battery charges. Yes. So the sociologist questions would be specific questions that would be interested, they would be interested in, oh my God, there is some problem here. Okay, so their questions will be related to various social, cultural factors or practices influencing people's actions and responses to various pandemic situations. So this kind of pandemic situation, since it affects lives of all people, so how do people respond to these situations? Are they doing it adequately, or are they in greater crisis? Because of this, most of the people would have both positive and negative consequences. Are they able to receive adequate support and help from the state government? How are they behaving? How are their actions? What is the outcome of these participating in various interventions or programs that have come up as a part of this situation, pandemic situation? So sociologists would be interested in addressing these specific questions. And another questions would be social dynamics and community engagement. See, how are the social different sections of people, what is the kind of nature of interaction that takes place as a result of the situation? And how are the community engagement? Is it supportive of each other, mutually supportive? Or, it is in contrast, or, it is conflicting. There are any conflictings, between the one particular section of the society receiving this, responding to this pandemic crisis in a positive way. Another section, they are not responding, or even if they want to respond, the government support is not forthcoming and not receiving adequate and sufficient help from support from the government. So these are the questions sociologists would be interested in. And stakeholders' perceptions and attitude. There are variety of stakeholders who participate in this kind of program. We have the health workers, the medical staff, whom we call as corona warriors, and then we have the paramedical staff. Then we also have the security police people, who are trying to maintain security in terms of imposing, or in terms of complying with many of the mandates and rules and regulations, very strict rules and regulations that are imposed by different state governments. So how are these stakeholders responding to these kinds of situations? Also, we have most of the when they have different kinds of various kinds of mandates for each of the sector. So then how are they responding to this? What kinds of practices, what is their perceptions? What kinds of attitudes, is it supportive of these kinds of situation? Or, it is not, in fact, it is negatively, affecting or impacting this entire, intervention. So this would be another question sociologists would be interested in. Okay, so now we try to understand what kinds of specific questions would economists and political scientists or sociologists would be interested in. Let's know what kinds of specific questions educationists would be interested during this pandemic situation. So educationists, as educationists, we would be interested in finding out what formats of education are effective under the pandemic situation. As we understand, the pandemic situation made all schools, shut down. They shut down all the schools, because they did not want to take any kind of risks, allowing students to attend schools. So alternatively, they had alternative formats of education, because you can't allow students to stay at home, without learning anything. So they came out with remote formats of education, that is online education. And then online school education, or the online education at higher level, college level, or at the professional education level, it took its own, formats, in the sense, online format, depending on the kinds of resources that were available. Private schools, the private institutions, and then the public institutions, the government institutions had, different kinds of resources, as a result of which the responses or the kinds of engagement, learning engagement students would be interested in was quite different, from each institution to institution, or from different sectors. So as a result, so there were different kinds of variety of issues, which emerged. So we would be interested in, as educationists would be interested in finding out what formats of education, the kind of online format of education that's taking place at the school level for different schools, different kinds of schools, and different kinds of education, colleges, higher education institutions. Is it, effective under the pandemic situation? Because this was, just like work from home for people who are working people. So for the students, they were supposed to learn from home. So this kind of a situation, it really, we had, emerging different kinds of responses, and then we would be interested in finding out what are the learning outcomes, how effective are these kinds of formats of education. The next question would be how students, teachers, and various stakeholders respond to the new education formats. As we understand, we know that, the responses, some students or some homes of the students, families, they want parents, they want this kind of online education to be continued. Some they say it is not effective, and some they say they have their own problems of, providing adequate, wherewithal and resources. As a result, they're not in a position to support, the online education for their students. And then some institutions, even the teachers themselves, have varied response. So then the stakeholders, in the sense, the managements, or the other kinds of parents, or other kinds of educational functionaries who have to manage these institutions and the education program, they all have their own diverse opinions. So there is no one single kind of a uniform type of responses for this situation. Some they want it, some they do not want remote education. So online format of education, this is something, which had to be put in place alternatively when there is a total shutdown of the schools. So both of them, the online education, sometimes it has certain kinds of positive benefits, and more than positive, there are a lot of negative kind of impacts it had, in terms of, basically in terms of social interaction, where students were supposed to learn lot of values and other things other than non-academic kinds of attitudes and values and other kinds of skills. They were supposed to learn from, when mixing with people in face-to-face situation was totally removed. So for them, now they're learning from home with only elders, or very rarely interacted, and although they were connected by technology, very rarely that in-person interaction took place. As a result, there are different kinds of learning outcomes that we could see. So as educationists, we would be interested in trying to find out what kinds of issues would be there when this kind of format takes place. And students learning and achievement also is another question. So how are students learning? Is the level of learning same across different types of schools and different kinds of home background on different levels of education? And what is the achievement or the outcome coming out of this kind of a novel situation of remote education? And also one more interesting question would be public and private education system, the equity and efficiency issues, whether the public schools are efficient in terms of imparting this kind of education, or the private schools are doing much more better than the public schools, and as a result of this the learning outcomes are more or is it possible that the public schools, the private schools have large number of students coming from high income groups. As a result, the homes can provide the necessary resources and wherewithals, and students are in a position to engage more effectively and more positively, and the outcomes are also corresponding outcomes are also very good in terms of these private institutions. These are some of the questions that we need to answer. So we would be interested in finding out this. Now we also, as a social science researcher, we also have psychologists in this group. So their focus would be more on people's perceptions and attitudes, emotional well-being, mental health. So they would be more interested in finding out how do people perceive this kind of a threat. This is a threatening situation which is making everybody very insecure, and there is kind of a paranoia. which has really spread across all sections of people. So how are they responding to this? Are they in a position to find out, that, this, when they are at home or when they come out, what are the kind of, perceptions these people have when they have to interact with other people? And what are the kind of attitudes and emotional well-being? This is most important, because most of the people, who under this pandemic situation are emotionally very insecure, and there is so much of anxiety, among all sections of people and across all ages. So this mental health and the emotional health is being affected, drastically. So psychologists would be interested in finding out how is it impacting. As a result, their productivity, their personal well-being is being, now, negatively affected. Another question would be children's growth and development, learning and achievement, emotional well-being. So this is another one question, which would be interested in. Psychosocial dynamics. This is again, the social dynamics, the interaction, social, interaction, the peer loss. Supposing, the peer loss is something, which is peer interaction for students or the children of that age, or even for those students, who are in higher education. Most of the learning takes place, or the social skills which they pick up is more by, in-person action, in-person interaction, not through technology mediated interaction. So this is something, where there is a peer loss for everybody, because they're not in a position to meet their friends in person. So it's all takes place through mediated technologies. So this is really trying to put one more, blockade on the mental blockade on the children or the students, who are participating, who are supposed to participate in school programs and college programs. So these kinds of social dynamics, how is it affecting? How is it, affecting, and what can one do for this? See, these are the kinds of questions which psychologists would be interested in. Then behavioral scientists, generally, basically they will be interested in large-scale surveys to see how people respond to information in a crisis. Because of this, there are a lot of information that's pouring in for people, either through different sources, either it can come through media, it can come through newspapers, it can word of mouth, there are then, the radio, then, you have the internet. So they keep, as they're exposed to variety of information that, during this COVID situation, it's not only in our own country, it's also in probably not only in our own state, it's in the neighboring state, in our country, across different regions and across the globe in different countries. Say, how do people, try to digest this information, and how do they use it, for positive benefit? So this would be another question that behavioral scientists would be interested in. Now, I think, see, basically when we are conducting social research, social science research, we tend to use paradigms, basic paradigms that are available. So essentially we see two major paradigms. One is the positivism, other one is interpretivism. So this is based on certain kinds of assumptions, theoretical assumptions, when we do research in social science. See what we believe, what are the kinds of belief systems, are the principles, are the theories, that we underlying theories when we engage in these kinds of researches relating to different kinds of different aspects of society or economy and political science. So now, for this, under positivism, we tend to see that society, the belief is that society consists of social facts which exercise coercive control over individuals, and people's actions can generally be explained by the social norms that they have been exposed to through their socialization. So as per this belief, it's a major, there is some kind of a major, this thing, that, social facts that are available in the society at a large scale, society, at a large scale facts which are available, which can be used to explain different kinds of social changes that takes place. Or there are norms, convention norms and accepted societal norms, which are, either, complied by people. So we can use them to conduct research for understanding these kinds of, even in COVID situation, we can understand this. Another, in contrast to this, interpretivism, the paradigm, it believes that individuals are more important, not the society as a whole. Positivism sees society as a whole, so believes in social facts. Here, under interpretivism, it's the individuals who matter more, because they have consciousness and are not merely puppets. They're not mere puppets. You can take everybody for granted. It's not like that, like, we use it in positivism. So in positivism, you don't consider an individual opinion, individual as a very important factor. So you try to see that in a very aggregate, aspect, in aggregate fashion. But here in interpretivism, we try to give importance to every individual, because the belief is that, see, everybody, has the positive, believism, because they respond differently to different kinds of situations. Individuals are intricate and they have their own mind and they're complex and they have different kinds of experiences and they understand the same objective reality in different ways. Under positivism, it's assumed that everybody sees these kinds of things in the same way. But here, each individual matters. As a result, interpretivism, highlights that individual is important. So we need to engage, when we are conducting social science research, it is not large-scale social facts which matter to explain the social world and understanding social behavior, but it is the individuals also matter. So the individual actions and individual behavior, their experiences also need to be highlighted for understanding objective reality. Now, general focus of social research under positivism would be, the point of research is to uncover the laws that govern human behavior, just as scientists have discovered the laws that govern the physical world. Just like, you see the natural sciences and the physical sciences, there are laws, which explain different kinds of phenomena. So even here, under positivism, we tend to believe that, there are laws that govern human behavior. So accordingly, people, they behave. And then prefer quantitative research method. As a result of this, if we want to conduct, this research using the positivism, we need to have large-scale social facts, which can be collected using social surveys, large-scale surveys. So they prefer quantitative research method. When you have a large sample, you can't be in a position to do individual, research analysis. So we would rather use quantitative research methods to explain, the researcher to remain detached from the respondent. So here, we are not interested in, which individual has what kind of experience. We would try to aggregate everybody under one thing, and then we try to find out what patterns and trends emerge as a result of this. Using quantitative research methods, we will be in a position to find out what are the different kinds of trends and patterns emerge as a result of these kinds of a large scale, analyzing the large scale social facts. Here, we are not concerned about which individual has got, maybe one individual has got very extreme kind of view, but the behavior may be different. We tend to aggregate everybody under different kinds of typologies, and then we use quantitative research methods, say in terms of averages, or say in terms of some scales, higher and lower. So these kinds of things in research methods, quantitative methods, we use to understand the social world or the social, action, human behavior. Under interpretivism, the point of research is to gain in-depth insight into the lives of respondents. So here, so under positivism, when we are trying to see human behavior in large scale using quantitative research methods, it's only survey research methods we would be interested only in trying to see what are the major trends and patterns that emerge. Under interpretivism, we will be interested to gain in-depth insight into the lives of respondents. So we try to identify cases, which are extreme, those, who have different kinds of views. Some people, who do not, comply with the normal standard, ways of, laws. So how do they explain? So we try to understand, we try to believe that, individuals are also important. We need to take them into consideration. We need to give them enough adequate focus and adequate emphasis for understanding their lives and experiences. So we do not use quantitative methods here. So we prefer qualitative methods to understand this, like case studies, like close interaction. So we dig deeper and deeper to find out evidences, real-time empirical evidence. Then we use case studies or qualitative ethnographic methods. So this is a general focus of social research between positivism and interpretivism. Then what are the preferred research methods, as we just discussed earlier? So quantitative techniques would be preferred under positivism. So this is required, this quantitative methods require research to be valid, reliable, and representative. So we follow all the scientific norms of establishing validity, reliability, and representative. We try to be as objective as possible. We don't allow our element of subjectivity or the bias to creep in here in the positivism. So we use different kinds of techniques or the different kinds of methods which are available to make the data look more valid and reliable and representative. So when we're talking about different patterns and trends, about, either over a period of time or across different spaces, we are trying to say that, this is applicable for a general population, in the sense that, we try to take a sample which is more objective, representative, the sample has the same attributes that of the population or the universe. So we tend to use quantitative methods, and then we are more scientific in explaining. We also try to see the relationship, and then we use statistical different techniques to see the correlation or the relationship between different kinds of variables which are present there in the research, and we try to explain it with more scientific methods. Here in interpretivism, we use more of qualitative methods, and then also to a little extent we are prepared to sacrifice reliability and representativeness for greater validity. Validity is more important here. We try to have very deeper conversation with the cases here. So we do not go, we do not tend to use any kind of scales or research instruments which would gather data on a large scale. Here, either it is a case study or interaction or, individual interaction, either it could be in-depth interview or it could be focus group discussion. So these are the kinds of ethnographic methods, participant observation. So we tend to use these methods to collect more valid information, but we are not trying to generalize to the general population. So that is something, which is another important dimension here. Now, you have social research methods paradigms. We see that, society shapes individuals, the positivist belief. And so social facts are important. That's the belief. Interpretivist, on the other hand, they see that qualitative using methods such as unstructured interviews or participant observation are more helpful in trying to understand the behavior of people. And in social research method, we see that quantitative methods, that is large scale surveys, overview of the society, they try to uncover social trends. In interpretivism, we see that individuals are intricate and complex, and there is a need for understanding different people's experience, and objective reality is very important are very different from person to person. Then under positivist, we see that scientific methods, techniques to study social world just as natural world. Then we have criticize scientific sociology. In fact, interpretivists, they don't believe in using any of these social scientific instruments. They, in fact, they criticize, because they try to hide many of the specific issues or the problem experiences of individuals. So they criticize scientific sociology. Many of the statistics it relies on them are socially constructed, because these are the instruments which are socially constructed. We don't try to gather valid evidences. Then under positivist, the method paradigm includes focus on comparison correlations. Here, understanding under interpretivism, understanding human action demands empathetic understanding is more important. We need to see the world through the eyes of the actors doing acting research. I don't know whether it's visible, this chart. It only try to provide some kind of a perspective of framework for conducting research, in a social science discipline. So we have theoretical assumptions based on the theoretical assumptions of positivism, interpretivism, the scientific or the qualitative method, quantitative method that we adopt. So everything we talked about, it's schematically represented here in this diagram. And we also notice that, factors affecting the choice of research method. Which choice of method, do we have to engage in social surveys, or do we need to have choose a case study or a participant observation ethnographic methodology? It depends on certain practical factors, and also there are certain ethical considerations. So whether we use positivism or interpretivism, when you want to choose a particular a topic for research, then we need to have both practical and ethical dimensions. See, practical, we have to see whether this kind of a research, conducting research, we will have, supposing, we tend to do some macro survey, social facts, some trends and patterns. Then, the practical consideration would be time. Do we have sufficient time to do this? Do we have money, that is adequate resources? Then funding, whether we have somebody funding or, it is our own money that we are trying to use. And do we have opportunity and access to information? And skills and characteristics of the researcher. Is the researcher, equipped, prepared adequately? He has got enough skills to conduct this kind of a large-scale survey, would be practical dimension. And ethical dimension would be informed consent versus, supposing we decide that we need to conduct case studies, do we have the consent of the people, who are participating in our research, would be another ethical consideration. And then confidentiality is another one, where we trying to find out whether we are in a position to maintain confidentiality, the information that is provided, because we have face-to-face interaction, in-depth interviews with the respondents. As a result of this, rich information is, now, we gathered. So are we in a position to maintain confidentiality of the interviewer, because many sensitive issues or many sensitive information we would be gathering. So whether, we are in a position to maintain confidentiality will be another ethical consideration. Avoiding harm to respondents and others, particularly this, when we are trying to behavioral psychologists, when we are trying to conduct experiments with animals, or even in case of humans, when we are trying to interview some of those victims, like victims of rape or victims of those, who are put to a lot of shame and, harmful conditions, whether when we are trying to collect information from them, whether, we are not emotionally or psychologically harming them, we are trying to maintain their comfort zone. So this is another one, whether we are in a position to see that, they're ensured of any kind of, emotional, kind of, attack, when we are trying to ask questions relating to their problems or issues that they have faced. Another one is, legal dimension is another one, whether do we have, legal consideration or legal sanction to conduct research, and then whether, lastly, the ethical would be, whether, it does any good of conducting, any good for the society. So then, apart from this practical and ethical consideration, the choosing a topic also depends on the nature of topic itself. See, what are the methods that we trying to use is also depending on the topic. Like there are comparisons over time, longitudinal, supposing this is the focus of the topic, then, the choice of method, will depend on the take of the topic that we would be choosing. Certain research methods suit certain topics. You can't apply same research method for everything, like whenever you have to conduct like nationwide polling social survey questionnaire or deviant subculture participant observation. Supposing we are interested in doing some work on transgenders or something, it has to be case studies. So you can't do a large scale survey in such cases, situations, or some victims of rape or victims of some ethnic, clashes, where they have suffered emotionally, they have suffered heavily in terms of their emotional breakdown. So such cases, it has to be in not kind of large scale questionnaire, you can't have. So the choice of methods also depends on the kind of topic that we tend to choose, or cross-national, or in fact an interstate comparison you want to do. Official statistics are available, so we would use that, or historical documents or research documents which are available. Now, what are the standard data collection methods? So we notice that there are 6 standard methods for collecting data. One is interviews, then the second one is questionnaires and surveys, then observations, documents and records. Also, we try to collect information from them, and then we have focus group discussions. Then also oral histories, where we tend to gather from oral narratives. So these are standard data collection methods. Now, data collection methods. So these are the available standard, paradigm, and then the standard different methods of data collection, the different kinds of instruments that we use while conducting research surveys in social science, whether it be an economist or an educationist or a sociologist. Then, but then under the pandemic situation, can we use the same kinds of research methods? This would be an important question. Now with the lockdown, with social distancing, then there are a lot of this, because of this virus, pandemic is spreading through human contact, human interaction. So there is now a restriction on interaction, physical interaction, and maintaining social distances. So when such situation is currently underway, so how do we conduct field surveys? Because most of the social surveys data, real-time evidence come from conducting field surveys or household surveys. It could be like census enumeration. Supposing you're interested in finding out the poverty level or the wage, employment level. So what is the kind of educational probably participation? These are all regular annual, you have the annual kind of surveys that are being conducted by the National Statistical Organization, the household survey, census enumeration that takes place. So how do we conduct these kinds of surveys under a pandemic situation? Is it possible now? We are not in a position to visit any homes or not, leave alone visiting. Even visiting any offices also is now, it comes with some kind of a mandates and some kind of a disciplined behavior. So is it possible to do that? Are people available to provide us the required information? And then there is every possibility of, risking, infection, when we do these field surveys. So it is not possible to do any, in fact, major problem for social science research right now is that they've abandoned field surveys. So nobody, even if they conduct, even if they're engaged in social science research, this is, abandoning field surveys because of this restrictions, lockdown, is a major blow to conducting social science research. Then primary contact, also we notice that particularly when we are conducting either social surveys through face-to-face interviews or administering a questionnaire, or conducting case studies where you need to engage in in-depth interviews, we need to have primary contact with the respondents. So that is simply not possible under the present situation. So neither, we are in a position, we do not have that enough, to go and, courage to go contact the primary respondents. And even the primary respondents themselves, they may not be willing to provide any kind of, may not invite anybody to go to their houses or, provide information. So face-to-face interviews, interaction is totally ruled out now. So visiting research sites, data centers, supposing, I am interested in understanding some community participation, then I need to be there to conduct this thing. Or if I have to collect some information from the documents and centers, where the data is stored, I need to visit those places. So this also is another, restriction that will not allow us to engage in this kind of a research method. And participant and non-participant observation, observing actions and behavior of people during different situations is completely ruled out because you need to be present there. Then in such cases, what do we do now? So now the major data collection methods that normally social science researchers engage in are totally now, it's not ruled out. I mean, it is ruled out. We cannot use these methods. So then there are alternate data collection methods under COVID-19 situation. So does it mean that, because of these kinds of limitations and restrictions to do field work, there is no research that is taking place in social science disciplines? No, it is not like that. Now people have come out with alternative modes of data collection. So one is that, it is possible to do that without visiting or without entering real-time data. It is possible to collect real-time data evidences. So there is what they try to do is they're using a mixed mode panel survey method. Supposing in a national scientific organization, they have a statistical organization. They conduct, these regular, field surveys, and then they already have used, they've already collected and then they have stored this data, statistical data. So, and then similarly, different departments have, collected, gathered, statistics, numerical data that is need not be, from schools. It is also possible, you need not go to schools regularly. The department itself, might conduct regular surveys, annual surveys of students, participation, attendance, or their achievement. So it is possible to send questionnaire to the schools and conduct this information. So this is possible where it is already available in a secondary data source. So now harnessing real-time data from big method big data available on virtual platform. There are different platforms, virtually they collect data, big data, particularly this Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. These are only some examples that I'm giving. They have gathered from the time, these social media, they are put in place. Lot of, huge data they have collected about human activities. It could be education, because, every Facebook or LinkedIn, it gives profile. So you will be in a position to find out what is the profile of each person, who holds an account with this social media, or work, or shopping, what kinds of shopping people do, then health and sentiments. So all this information, it is available in the big data. So it is possible to harness. These are all real time, when we're doing, see, if I'm not visiting a shop personally and trying to buy, I'm still ordering online and getting things. The e-commerce, the e-trade, is already there. So I'm trying to buy. So still, my behavior, my consumer behavior is still possible to gather this data, because this is already available on these kinds of online platforms. So it is possible to use this harnessing real-time data for big data. Then large coverage of global population. These things, this big data, it does not restrict one's data to only one particular region. So you can get, you can try to, sitting here itself, you can try to get data of people, belonging to different countries, or belonging to different social, profiles, who have different social profiles or work profiles. So it is possible to gather data from these different sections of population. And then, you need to have self-administered, web-based, internet-based questionnaire, or telephone or mobile interview. So you have these lot of internet surveys that are being, like, monkey survey, probably, you would have participated in some of these surveys. When they try to administer questionnaire based on this, either through internet or web-based questionnaire or telephone, they can have even telephone and mobile interview. So where, you try to provide information and the researcher tries to gather information. But then telephone and mobile interview, because for telephone, you need to have demands a postal address. On the mobile interview also, you need to have mobile numbers. So sometimes randomly they pick up the mobiles, because once your mobile is registered, for something, in any part, this thing, they try to call you and then they try to gather information. The moment, it is registered, then your profile or your information, personal information, is already available. So these kinds of, data, this media based data which is available can be harnessed. Then online and phone surveys, of course, they demand postal address. Then now, alternate data collection methods under COVID-19 situation. Now, supposing we are not in a position to administer a questionnaire and do a large-scale household survey, so we need to tap more of secondary data source, because secondary data sources are already available in printed records and documents, or it may be stored in digital mode. Records and documents will be digital modes, will be digital records will be available, from which you can harness this information, or online information, documents information is also possible to obtain this. Then using statistical or numerical database panel data sets, longitudinal or time series, it is possible to obtain this, gather this evidence, real-time evidence from these sources. So tapping secondary source data would be another alternative data source that social science researcher can use. Then social media platforms, apart from these recorded and documented data sets, you also have social media platforms like blogs and micro blogs like Twitter and Tumblr, where people every minute, they're tweeting, or every minute, there is a blog, that is every minute there is a blog that's being generated. So these also provide some kinds of information relating to a personal social behavior or psychological aspects. So it is possible, even sometimes they even share, because most of the time they share their health. In fact, health data, health profile data are also being stored. So whether we can use this, in the place of, primary data collection. Then social networking sites, Facebook, WhatsApp group, and MySpace, they provide lot of, rich data, rich, diverse data, not only about one particular region, across the globe, you can gather this data and try to find out, what kind of social interaction, how are people responding to this situation. So it is also possible that they're sharing their kinds of problems and issues, or the kinds of positive and negative implications of this through these social networking sites. So it is possible to analyze this rich data that is available and conduct research. Then apart from this, we also have content communities where they try to upload everything on the YouTube. Then you have the Pinterest, then you have the Pinterest, then you have the Instagram, the Flickr. So all these content communities also do provide rich data, diverse data for engaging in social science. Only thing is, we need to, after identifying what is the kind of research question that we need to focus on, so you can gather this data and try to analyze and generate more analysis and generate, what is the outcome of these kinds of information. It is possible to do cross-country comparison, or between gender, where how men and women, they try to react or interact, and then what is it that they're trying to share. So are different depending on the age profile of the respondents. So it is possible to conduct research using this data source. Then here also collaborative projects. Wikipedia as a source has lot of resources to collaborate projects. In fact, they're inviting people from different parts of the globe to invite. They invite and then they send you, what is the kind of research question that you have, what is the kind of research interest that you have, and then it is possible to collaborate across different spaces and across different regions, and then try to conduct research relating to any particular topic that we are interested in. Then you have the virtual social worlds, game worlds. They also come out with different kinds of questions. Now, some of the simple research topics in education, like, I'm taking only education as an example. So one is that, like, what is the kind of topic that we can engage in now? Effect of lockdown on conducting terminal examination. This is something, it is possible to do this, by at least, trying to locate the students, through the institutions, the colleges, or the schools, where, some decisions have been taken with respect to conducting a terminal examination. Because so far as examination, terminal examination or semester examination, end exams are concerned, different states, have, different kinds of views, and they are trying to, and then there are also different views between public and private institutions. So if we are trying to find out, what is it that we are trying to do, it is possible to do this with mail surveys. It is possible, or telephone surveys. It is possible to engage in this kind of research. Then students' compliance to pandemic restrictions. This is how are they, now that most of these universities are particularly at higher level of education level of institutions, they are trying to open schools and colleges, and they're trying to see that students in some countries, in fact, they tried opening schools in between. And now when the second wave, struck these countries, they have again closed down. So, but then, university across overseas students, they're allowing overseas students, from other countries to go there, enroll in universities, and they're trying to do this, online education with total, compliance to pandemic restrictions. So how is it happening? So it is possible to do this, collect information through secondary source. Then teachers' perceptions and preparedness about online education. Again, these are all topics, some of the topics which we can now, use this topic and try to take, gather data, real-time data through through telephone interviews or through mail surveys, or, it is not possible to do this, in person. So it is possible to use other modes of data collection. And students and parents' perceptions about online education also can be done similarly. So now with this, I think, I'm trying to close this, all my videos. So if you have any questions, I've done with this, Professor Loknath Mishra.
Thank you, madam.
My slide presentations are over. If there is some interaction, that they,
yes.
Okay, I'm ready here.
Yeah, Dr. Sajad, you carry over.
Yes, thank you, ma'am, for such a nice presentation that you have made, and deliberation that you have taken up on social science research. there are two types of questions has emerged. One is the observation that also I'll just let you know, observations of the participants,
Okay.
and per se the questions as well. One of the observation that Parvesh has made is that under the social science research, when you were referring to what came up as an emergent issues during the lockdown. So she says that under the social science research, no researcher has came so far with the human nature of the people that is visibly emerging during the lockdown period. So this observation she has made. Another observation made by Latha GM, she says that you talked of the freedom restriction done during the lockdown. Had the purpose of the safety, it was the purpose of the safety, for the purpose of the safety of the people, rather than grabbing the freedom of the people.
Okay.
So this was the observation made by Latha. Ojit has made observation as well as he has asked you a question as well. What he found in his research, that there was different types of situations emerging in cities as well as villages. And there was a greater divide in the village where the higher barrier was visible in terms of neighboring and ethnic extremism. So he wants to know what came up with your own survey that you had done. And second thing is that what kind of survey methods would be better to understand rural and urban divide. So this is the question. And third question, would you like to take up the questions individually, or should I speak the question first?
Yeah, let me take up these questions.
Okay.
About restricting people's freedom and humane nature, See, because what I have been discussing is that, there are different kinds of issues which have emerged as a result of this pandemic crisis situation. Okay, so now but as social scientists, social science researchers, we are interested in finding out, gathering empirical evidence and finding out, what could be possible, solutions, or what are the kinds of different issues that are emerging. But then, we are also have some kind of a limitation and restriction in not being able to gather real-time evidence from the field. So this is a problem. So now, humane, trying to see students or from the teachers, yeah, that is right. Online education. Now, most of the schools and colleges, they're imposing a lot of restrictions for both students and teachers to participate in this online education. So that human face, as I don't remember the name of the person who said that, that is missing. Now, how do we gather? That should be the question. See, I said, there are different methods of gathering. One is that, we are not in a position to you visit these homes and try to gather, or visit these institutions and try to collect information. Now, how do we gather this? So wherever, there's these kinds of narratives, they emerge. Sometimes it comes up in media, sometimes it comes up in newspapers, sometimes it is reported in journals. So we use the same data. We try to use the same data and try to see how much of these evidences, sometimes it is also possible that under the emotional stress, people may not provide objective analysis and objective responses to the problems. So we have to, as researchers, we have to use our own analytical skills, but then doing some kind of a survey of the reported evidences. See, what I'm trying to see is reported evidences. So reported evidences may emerge from different sources. So now, we're tapping these sources, and then, how do we do this? And then we need to be more objective in analyzing these things. So how do we do that, is another question. So we raise questions and then we try to gather evidences using some alternative methods. This is something. And also we need to find out how practical it is to gather evidences. Supposing, do we have enough number of reported evidences to arrive at some kind of a general perceptions about the problem? Supposing there are only one or two cases, some cases, sporadic cases, from which can we try to generalize generalize, it is not possible. So we need to see that, as another person said, there is a divide between rural and urban, a lot of ethnic diversity that which really impacts these kinds of behaviors and actions. This is something, we have to do that, we have to use that. Whether, we need to do this at a specific, at a disaggregate level, specific context situation. Supposing, we do have some 5 or 6 cases of, some people, reporting about that, that they feel totally really stressed, putting their children on online education. So we use that. Then there are also, at the same time, there are also people, with lot of resources. They try to price this because they feel that, with student tending to keeping students engaged, children engaged, job was done earlier by schools. Now it is shifted to homes. So for them, parents, who are otherwise engaged in other kinds of work, for them, engaging their children, school-going children is another problem. So you have different kinds of, diverse views coming up. So we need to gather, it is possible to gather these kinds of reported evidences from different platforms. Either it may come through your social media, Facebook, WhatsApp. So we use this, we try to gather and then try to get some meaning out of this, analyzing these reports and then get meaning out of this. This is my response to the questions that were posed. Then there was one more, I just forgot. What was the last question?
The last question was that what kind of survey methods would be better to understand the rural and urban divide?
Yeah, rural and urban. One is that, you see, because right now, I don't know whether which area, which discipline he's referring to. I just want to know, whether it is he's from economics or he's from sociology or education, rural urban divide, because you are trying to see this from different dimensions, Are you in a...
He's from science, madam. He's from science and biological science. He's from.
Okay, biological science. Okay, fine. One is that, biological science. One is that it is possible, these are the students, who are being now, are learning through some online. So they hail both from urban and rural areas. So now how is this, teachers? One is that you can see from the teacher's point of view. So wherever this is happening, you need to find out, where are these things being conducted, which school is conducting this. So particularly biological science, if you are interested in knowing, how is biological science class teaching, is being done through remote, then it is possible to obtain both teachers' perspective as well as students who are learning and the parents, who from home, from whom they're learning. So you try to get both views, and then particularly institutional perspective. How are the schools, trying to make it, what is the kind of responsibility the schools are assuming insofar as different curricular studies and the curricular subjects are being, now, taught through online. So this is something, it is possible, but this cannot be done, visiting schools because its schools are shut down. It's only through telephones is one thing, or if they are connected on net, it is possible to obtain this information. Okay, so this is, and then you can't have a large scale sample for this. You need to have only, whoever is available. Sometimes we do research using available, sample, that is in a convenient sample. So because of this restriction, whoever is possible, probably word of mouth, you have this snowballing sampling, we call it as. So you can use this sampling method to find out, who else is being taught, who is ready, studying biological science. So how are the schools teaching this? How are the teachers, are trying to prepare? And then how are students learning? So this is another one, because earlier it used to be taught in a classroom situation. Now it is in a remote format. So this is something, so it is not possible to do a primary survey in the sense, visiting the homes, but it is possible to do this. Yeah, there is one more question, I don't know, I just missed that question.
Next question, there are 5 more questions, ma'am, in waiting.
Yeah.
So one question is related to the response that you are giving right now. Okay. And that I'll take up little earlier than the other questions.
Okay.
And Kojam Sobta has asked whether it is authentic to collect data of the case studies through telephonic interviews.
No, one is that, yeah, authenticity, yeah, that question is there. One is that, first of all, whether they're willing to provide, because conducting case studies demands more time. So whether they're willing to provide that much of time on mobile, phone, or, landline phone, whichever phone is available, it is possible. It depends on the background of the respondent, whether the background then has got these resources of, having a landline or mobile phone. So this is something. And then authenticity of the information, yes. One is that, in primary, when we do participant observation, and then when we interview the respondent face to face, the body language and all those things can be observed, and then you can also try to find out, whether he's giving honest response, or that it is being manipulated. Some kinds of behavioral this thing it's possible to judge, but here you would be missing all that. But then you can re-engage and then try to do this. Probably it is possible to have some kind of a cross validation data, in the sense that probably some other family members probably can be contacted to, supposing whenever you have some kind of a suspicion or doubt about the authenticity, then you need to revalidate this data. It is possible to I don't know if they're willing to contact other members, family members, or anybody who is got a similar kind of a experience, to find out, to ascertain, whether to what extent this is authentic or something. So this, of course, this would be another question, that it is not completely possible to avoid this kind of, possible, to avoid this kind of a non-authentic, data collection. But then, there are methods to revalidate this, cross-check, cross-validate this. Yes.
Exactly, ma'am. So there was one more observation that you were referring to earlier. So, I mean, Ojit had this particular, wanted to know that what came up with your own survey. Did you find any cementing of the relations or schism in the cities and villages? Your own observation.
Okay, no. Unfortunately, I haven't done any survey during the COVID situation. Okay. So now with whatever survey, that higher education, loan survey that I did was just before that was my latest this thing, now that I'm retired, so I'm engaged in free independent consultancy. That was one of the last research consultancy I did. That was done 2 years, not last year, just before this thing, by which time we had already conducted the field survey. Supposing we were to start this sometime during last year, probably we would have ended up not collecting because it demanded lot of field survey and primary household data. So this came up, this happened before the lockdown. So we had the usual, structured questionnaire method, which we administered. And then, we also, this was particularly from the state government program. I don't know if she is interested, if he or she is interested in knowing about this research between urban and rural. Yes, in fact, because this intervention loan through the banks, this is for those students who have the credit constraints, that they're not in a position, because of their economic vulnerability, they're not in a position to raise loan from the bank. The state government is chipping in and then trying to provide loans at very low 2% rate. And then, it gives for only professional courses. And then, it's most of the times, we notice that most of the people now, it's all professional courses. When I said it's the most happening green, what is that, sunrise sector, that is the engineering students, who availed this loan. And there was no urban-rural divide as such because of this intervention. And it was particularly for backward class students coming from most vulnerable households. So the rural people also were in a position to avail this loan to a greater extent. Of course, there was, in so far as boys and girls in rural areas was concerned, it was more in favor of boys. So this is something which I came up. But anyway, this was conducted pre-pandemic situation. So we use the regular standard methods of collecting data. Yeah.
Yeah, so next question is from Vijender Singh Chauhan.
Yeah.
And he has said that while it is understandable that social science research methods are affected by COVID situation, but it is also true that some changes that were forced due to the COVID are irreversible. Second question he wants, so the second question that is there, what is your own opinion for the new normal to the social science methods?
Yeah, since so far as some changes in irreversible, that is right, we do agree, but there is something, but then, like as social scientists, we would be interested in knowing there are certain things, which demand some kinds of a new approach. So you need to have some new theoretical paradigms to explain these kinds of behavior, because this COVID situation, this pandemic crisis is something, which came like bolt from the blue. So nobody expected, and then also nobody expected it would last so long. So this is something, now we have also views that it's going to continue for a few more months, or probably the next 2 years also. So the different kinds of views are emerging now with this, so there are some changes we need to make. So but then if we are trying to understand how community engagement and so preparedness of the people belonging to different social sectors, then yes, irreversible change that is accepted. But then as social scientists, what is our responsibility? It is simply not just because it is a public health crisis, it's not a responsibility of totally medical staff. It's a medical issue. You cannot say that, say as this thing, because it is also affecting schools, it is also affecting colleges, it's also affecting the other sectors, industries, labor. So what is it that we need to do that? How do we prepare this? Are there any kind of alternative things that we can talk about, or something which we have to keep? Now these kinds of probably pandemic situation might come even during the next few years. So how do we prepare this? So trying to assess the preparedness of the people, and then what is the kinds that it is also possible that you can't have one quick fix solution. So you need to be as probably as dynamic as possible to see that some changes are now are bound to be here, and then we need to respond. After that probably it's only a short-term period, then there may be something else, so we need to again rechange. So the behaviors we need to probably have some kind of a not a rigid behavior, need to be little disposed towards these kinds of changes, and then temporary kind of not fixed kind of attitude. So we need to be little more flexible in terms of our responses and thinking. This is how I would feel. Yes,
right, ma'am. So two more questions are there on the barriers.
Yeah.
Vijender wants to know whether the COVID situation has cemented or weakened the barriers, the social barriers. And second thing is whether the COVID situation has interacted with the already existing barriers in the social groups, such as caste, class, and religion.
See,
so this,
it cemented or created more barriers is something in a question which in certain cases it is not just one response. In certain places, yes, it has but that's very remote and very little evidence. But then in terms of, yes, people have become like people are interested in trying to save their own kind of families, and then their own kinds of sections of society. So it is, and then in terms of trying to prepare, create barriers, we notice that initially, particularly the ethnic clashes, ethnic conflicts that happened during the beginning period, and even now sometimes we do see that people are not engaging in, see, that is something now initially that was there, but now I think people have tried to accept this as a reality. So it is whether you belong to one particular ethnic this thing, or you are in the mainstream class. So the responses are so much it depends on individual kind of responsibility and behavior. So it is possible that in some cases there is a cementing. I don't see that happening much, but it is, barriers now you see that it is really, because it is just not it's only the interaction, it is also impacting other aspects, spheres, like economic, like those people who want to pursue education, higher education, or those people who want to get jobs. So that is that's the most important thing for people who are now in a prime area, prime stage of being becoming more productive. So for them it's a big slap. And then I think whether it is cementing or this thing, that we don't see, because we don't see that kind of responsibility coming from the state government, because most of the times it is always in a very chaotic mode that's coming through. So this is how I would see that. Yes.
Right, ma'am. So another question is from Raj Rani, who has her own experience of research, and she says that, as you mentioned, that several researchers are using government data. However, the government data are either fudged on the one hand, and on the other, several data is unavailable. So under these circumstances, how far the research itself is valid?
Yeah, that's
And
right.
second thing is, whether it will be, can it be used for the problem solving then?
Yeah. Yeah, okay, very interesting question. Yes, because now we tend to rely more on secondary data sets which are already available. Yes, I do agree that so far as the reliability and credibility of the data are concerned, in fact, not only during the pandemic situation, even prior to this, we also, particularly when we did time series analysis, or we wanted to track some longitudinal trends and patterns. So we used to see that inconsistencies and discrepancies in the data. So that itself, was quite evident that it was not a very reliable. Then we had to have some other cross-check, the cross-checking the reliability test data. Now so this fudging data, yes, that is many times it is always possible that that is always particularly over-reporting when there are more resources have to be like procured, or under-reporting when you want to paint a very nice picture about yourself. This happens in all the government sectors. So one is that yes, we need to be aware of this, and what we can do using secondary data sets, particularly large-scale secondary data sets, is only trying to see only the general trends and patterns. We can't say that any kind of a correlation or any kind of deeper issues that we can talk about, because we can only see general trends and patterns, and wherever you find that there is inconsistencies and discrepancies, you can always report. Yes, fudging, particularly in this public health crisis, the figures that are being reeled out, or even National Sample Survey Organization, the employment, the inflation, all these data are provided by the national organizations. They're also being questioned. So it does happen, but as researchers, first of all, we are in a position to understand what are the emerging patterns and trends over the time. That is something. So, but that itself does not answer all the questions. So deeper questions demands deeper method, deeper sociological methods, for which we are not in a position to do that right now. So, but then available evidences from different sources. This is one way of doing that. You do analysis, you do an analytical. Using an analytical framework, you can find out what are the major trends and patterns over the period. Either it is time series or spatial across different regions or across different population segments if it's available, like NSO data, household survey data, it does give. But then after identifying trends, revealing the trends, major patterns and trends, then there are more questions that we need to answer, for which either we have evidences coming from other sources if it's available, or if we are not in a position to do that, we can always raise questions and then make an analysis. It is possible. It's not necessary that you have to have answer for everything. In fact, the research can raise more questions which demands deeper analysis. So this is how I would look at it.
Right, ma'am. So the last question I'm taking up, it's not a particularly a question, but it has generated from your own deliberation that you were taking up.
Yeah.
Involvement of the students is related to that. How to involve the students in the internship program during the pandemic era, when the internship basically involves physical presence of the students?
Yeah, that is one thing. See, internship is something, because that would be a major problem, providing particularly a practical experience. Supposing you're the teacher training program, for them, providing, because it demands that, schools should be available. Teachers are available, students are available. Now with the absence of these things, it is not possible to do this. So it's all simulated kind of a thing, exercises you can try, but that does not give one real, primary experience. So this is something probably which have to be postponed, or at higher levels of education, professional programs, they have their own internship programs. So then, mandatory kind of, restrictions and, all these conditions have to be complied with. That wherever sometimes they do allow, some of the companies are there allowing internship, particularly in other countries, but it's a very small number. In fact, this is also a major problem in other countries as well. But then see, it is possible, but higher level of education, people, it's assumed that, they're more responsible, they are in a position to take care of themselves. So they do allow, but with lot of restrictions. But lower level, particularly teacher training for primary level, where you do with an extended period of, few months or 1 year or 2 years of internship, that is not possible now. So that is something that has to be, it's a decision of the administrative decision. It's not the teachers, responsibility.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, madam.
Exactly, ma'am.
Thank you,
So
Professor
now
Mishra.
it's
It's been my
over.
pleasure. It's been my pleasure talking to you.
No, ma'am. Thank you, madam, for your nice presentation.
Thank you.
On behalf of Faculty Development Center, Mizoram University,
Yeah.
I thank you once again. And thank you once again to all the participants and the coordinator, the co-coordinator, Dr. Shehzad Ahmad. I thank all of you for participating in this program. Thank you, madam, and thank you all the participants.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah.